Her husband hid a pregnant mistress and turned violent. Then a secret warning saved her newborn and exposed all his crimes. The Boston winter morning began in a hospital room with a view of snow-covered trees outside the window. Martha Johnson held her newborn daughter Ava in her arms, smiling from her hospital bed. After 3 days of labor, she had given birth to a beautiful, healthy baby girl, and despite her exhaustion, she was filled with happiness. "She's absolutely perfect," whispered Nathan Clark, as he placed his hand on Martha's shoulder. His blue eyes shone with the joy of new fatherhood. Nathan was a successful real estate agent in Boston, always impeccably dressed. Today, too, he wore a fine navy suit, looking as if he were attending a business meeting. "Mom, can I hold the baby?" 12-year-old Thomas peeked in from the doorway. Martha's son from her previous marriage had been looking forward to his new sister's birth. "Of course, but be careful," Martha said as she watched Thomas enter. Her son's brown hair was just like his father's, and his personality resembled her ex-husband Brian's too, thoughtful, somewhat introverted, but kind-hearted to his core. Thomas carefully cradled the infant, and Martha felt a lump in her throat. They were turning a new page as a family. 5 years ago, Martha had ended her marriage to Brian, who had changed drastically due to alcoholism and work stress. It was one of the most difficult decisions of her life. Brian had been her college sweetheart, and she had watched him rise from a high school gym teacher to athletic director at a private school in Boston. But the pressure of his promotion had changed him. He would drink late into the night, and when he came home, he was irritable and lost his temper even in front of their child. Enough is enough, Martha had decided one night after Thomas had hidden in his room, frightened by his father's shouting. "We can't go on living like this anymore." After the divorce, Martha focused on her teaching career, teaching 8th grade English while building a modest but peaceful life with Thomas. Then, 2 years ago, she met Nathan at a parent-teacher conference when his daughter joined her class. Nathan, who had lost his wife to illness, was serious, polite, and above all, stable. He cherished Martha and Thomas, supporting them both financially and emotionally. He seemed like the ideal partner. Meanwhile, Brian had joined a rehabilitation program after the divorce and surprisingly succeeded in quitting alcohol. He continued working to repair his relationship with Thomas, never missing a scheduled visitation. He always treated Martha with respect and paid child support on time. "Martha, are you ready to be discharged?" Nathan's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Yes, just about. The nurse is bringing the paperwork right now." Nathan glanced at his watch and frowned. "I have an important meeting with a client this afternoon. I'll have to drop you off at home and leave right away." Martha sighed, but tried to be understanding. Nathan's work supported their lifestyle. Thanks to him, Martha could extend her maternity leave and move into a new townhouse. Still, deep down, she wished he would spend more time with them. "It's fine. Thomas will be there. And my mom said she'd come by in the evening." Just then, a tense atmosphere filled the room as someone knocked on the door. Brian stood there. "May I come in?" he asked hesitantly. Nathan's face tensed momentarily before he composed himself. "Of course. Come in," he said, his voice betraying slight tension. "Dad!" Thomas ran to him happily. "Look, it's my sister." Brian still retained the look of a former high school football star. After the divorce, he had rebuilt himself physically and mentally and now worked as a counselor at a local rehabilitation center. "Congratulations, Martha," he said with a sincere smile. "She's beautiful." Martha thanked him while sensing the tension between the two men in the room. She had a vague feeling that Brian still had feelings for her and that Nathan was aware of it. "Thomas, I'm looking forward to our camping trip this weekend," Brian said, gently ruffling his son's hair. "Me too. I've got the tent and sleeping bag all ready." Nathan looked at his watch again. "I should get going. I'll call the nurse." With that, he left the room. Brian looked at Martha and said softly, "If you need anything, just call me." There was something unspoken in his eyes, concern, caution, love. Martha couldn't tell. She only knew for certain that he had truly changed. When the discharge preparations were complete, Martha got into a wheelchair with the nurse's help. Ava was wrapped in a small pink blanket, sleeping in her mother's arms. Nathan had the car running and waiting. Thomas would come later in another car with Brian. 2 weeks had passed since Martha returned home with Ava. Their spacious townhouse in Boston's suburbs was overflowing with baby items. The living room sofa was covered with folded baby clothes. The coffee table held bottles, and stuffed animals were scattered across the floor. What was once an orderly space was now dominated by the gentle chaos that indicated a new life. "Mom, I warmed up Ava's milk," Thomas called from the kitchen. In those 2 weeks, he had grown into a surprisingly responsible brother. "Thank you. You're such a great help," Martha said with a tired smile. Ava was beginning to fuss in her arms, waving her tiny fists. After several sleepless nights, dark shadows had formed under Martha's eyes. She slowly sat down on the sofa and took the bottle from Thomas. After checking the temperature on her wrist, she gave it to Ava, who began to suck eagerly. The adorable sight filled Martha's heart with warmth, but at the same time she felt Nathan's absence keenly. He seemed to have gotten busier since the birth. He had been leaving early and coming home late. "Several major projects have coincided," he explained, but Martha felt something wasn't right, especially last night, when he came home at 1 a.m, and after showering and finally getting into bed, she detected the faint scent of women's perfume in his hair. "I'm overthinking things," Martha told herself, "just being postpartum nervous." But deep down, her intuition that something was wrong grew stronger. The doorbell rang, and Thomas ran to answer it. "It's Dad!" His cheerful voice echoed from the entrance. Brian entered, carrying paper bags in both hands. "How is everyone? I brought groceries and dinner." Martha felt a surge of gratitude. Brian had been incredibly reliable since the divorce, especially after she became pregnant. He helped with shopping, sometimes picked Thomas up from school, and was a valuable support when Nathan was busy, particularly since Martha's parents lived far away. "Thank you, Brian. You're such a help." Martha smiled. Heading toward the kitchen, he called over his shoulder, "No need for thanks. It's lasagna and salad, just needs to be heated up." Martha was impressed again by how Brian had changed. He used to be a man who never cooked at all, but now he could prepare decent home-cooked meals. His work at the rehabilitation center seemed to have helped him grow. "Hey, Mom! Dad's taking me to a baseball game this weekend," Thomas announced excitedly. "Is Nate Dad coming too?" Martha felt a pang in her heart when her son called Nathan Nate Dad. Thomas was desperately trying to find his place between his two fathers. "He seems busy with work." "I'll ask, but I can't promise anything." Disappointment mixed in Thomas's voice. "He's always busy, isn't he?" Brian returned from the kitchen and, perhaps sensing the situation, changed the subject. "By the way, Thomas, how was your math test last week?" At dinner, the three of them sat around the table while Ava slept in her bassinet next to Martha. The conversation flowed pleasantly, and Martha was grateful for this moment of peace. However, her phone rang, and Nathan's name appeared on the screen. "I'll be late again." His voice sounded tired, but also somewhat tense. "I have a dinner with clients. I'll be back by morning." "I see." Martha could barely respond. This was the third late dinner this week. "Take care." When she hung up, Brian was looking at her. He didn't say anything, but his eyes showed concern. "His work keeps him busy," Martha said, as if making an excuse. "He's working hard in this recession." Brian chose his words carefully and said, "Martha, if you ever have any concerns, I'm here to listen." She laughed briefly. "There's nothing to worry about. It's just a postpartum adjustment period." But her eyes told a different story. That night, after Thomas went to bed, Martha was having coffee with Brian in the living room. Ava had just fallen asleep in the next room. "Is there anything concerning you about Nathan?" Brian suddenly asked. Martha looked up in surprise. "What do you mean?" "Well, he seems very busy lately. Leaving you alone is—" "He's working for us," Martha said defensively. "Thanks to him, I can take time off work and be with Ava." Brian raised his hands. "All right, Martha, I'm just concerned." After a quiet moment, Brian stood up. "I should go. If you need anything, call me anytime." Martha saw him to the door. "Thank you. You've been such a help today." After he left, Martha entered Nathan's study. On his desk were neatly organized piles of documents. Despite feeling guilty about what she was doing, she opened a drawer, business cards, contracts, photos, and a note with an unfamiliar woman's name. Jessica, 8:30 p.m. at Sherwood. Martha's heart raced. Sherwood was a luxury hotel downtown. She took out her phone and checked the call history. The dates Nathan claimed to have client dinners matched the date on the note. Just then, Ava's cry came through the baby monitor. Martha returned the note to its place and hurried to her daughter. As she picked up Ava, tears fell from Martha's eyes. "It's okay. Mommy's here," she whispered to the baby, but she seemed to be reassuring herself as well. The pediatric ward at Boston General Hospital was warm and bright. Martha was wrapping baby Ava in preparation for discharge. It was 2 days earlier than planned, but the doctor had determined that both mother and child were healthy enough. In truth, Martha herself had requested the early discharge. "Are you sure you're ready to go home today?" Nurse Janet asked with concern. "Isn't your husband coming to pick you up?" Martha gently adjusted Ava in her arms and replied, "I'll be fine. I called a taxi. Nathan is out of town on an important real estate deal." She didn't add that Nathan hadn't contacted her for 3 days, or that she felt it would be mentally easier to rest at home. "What about your big brother?" Janet inquired further. "Thomas is at school. I plan to meet him at home afterward." Martha smiled. He's surely looking forward to spending time with his sister. After completing the discharge process, Martha got into a taxi. Newborn Ava, wrapped in a small pink blanket, slept on her mother's chest. Born just a week ago, she had already brought immeasurable joy to Martha's life. 1824 Commonwealth Avenue, please," Martha told the taxi driver. As the car pulled away from the hospital, Martha gazed out the window. Boston's early winter overcast sky seemed to reflect her complex emotions. Normally, the moment of bringing a new life home should be celebrated by the whole family. Yet Nathan was nowhere to be seen and wasn't answering his phone. He's probably just focused on work, Martha told herself. But deep in her heart she feared something else. In the 2 weeks since finding that note, she had looked for more evidence. But Nathan had become cautious, and she found no further clues. The taxi stopped in front of her apartment building. Martha thanked the driver and carefully got out, cradling the baby. "Can I help you?" the driver asked, but Martha politely declined. "I'm fine, thank you." The bag isn't too heavy. She held Ava in one arm and carried a small travel bag with the other, heading toward the apartment building's entrance. Passing through the elegant entrance of the luxury building, she took the elevator to the 5th floor. Walking down the hallway, Martha felt somewhat tired. She began to wonder if early discharge had been the right decision. "But it's much better to rest in my own home," she smiled at Ava. "We can have some lovely family time when everyone gets back." She approached the door to her apartment, but stopped a few steps away. Something seemed to be attached to the door, a piece of paper. Martha moved closer and read the hastily written note on the white paper. "Do not enter. Call the police immediately." Martha felt the blood drain from her face. Was this a joke? A prank? But the handwriting conveyed urgency and seemed serious. "Ava." She unconsciously pulled the baby closer to her chest. Various thoughts raced through her mind. A robbery, a gas leak, or had something happened to Nathan? Martha's hands began to tremble and cold sweat ran down her back. She tried to take out her cell phone, which she always carried, but struggled to search her bag with one hand. Finally retrieving the phone, she dialed 911. 911. "What's your emergency?" The operator's calm voice responded. There's a warning on my apartment door." Martha stumbled over her words. "A note saying do not enter, call the police. I have a newborn baby with me. Can you give me your address?" the operator asked immediately. Martha provided her address, and the operator promised to dispatch officers right away. "Please move away from the area and wait in a safe place. Do not enter the apartment under any circumstances until the police arrive." Martha retreated to the elevator hall and leaned against the wall. Ava began to whimper softly, perhaps sensing her anxiety. "It's okay. Mommy's here," Martha whispered in a trembling voice. "There's nothing to worry about." But she herself was shaking with fear. Who had left the warning, what was happening, and if Thomas had come home first? The thought made Martha shudder. About 5 minutes later, police sirens could be heard in the distance. Soon, 2 police officers emerged from the elevator. One was a middle-aged man, the other a young woman. "Mrs. Johnson?" the male officer asked. "Detective Jim Connor. This is Officer Sarah Ramirez." Martha nodded, beginning to say, "There's a warning on the door." "We understand. First, let's ensure the safety of you and your child," Detective Connor said calmly. "Do you know anyone on this floor?" "I'm close with the Jones family across the hall in apartment 703. Ramirez, have Mrs. Johnson and the baby wait there. I'll check inside with another officer." Officer Ramirez escorted Martha to her neighbor's home and explained the situation. Mrs. Jones worriedly invited Martha into her living room and prepared a warm spot for the baby. Martha watched from the window as 2 more police cars arrived. Her heart was pounding, imagining the worst. About 15 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Mrs. Jones opened it to find Detective Connor. His face was tight and stern, indicating something serious had happened. "Mrs. Johnson, we need to talk," he said quietly. Martha entrusted Ava to Mrs. Jones and stepped into the hallway. "What happened?" she asked in a trembling voice. Detective Connor took a deep breath and began carefully choosing his words. "There's been an incident in your apartment. A man believed to be your husband and a young woman were found injured." The blood drained from Martha's face. "Nathan, is he alive?" "Both are alive. They've already been transported to the hospital by ambulance. Their condition isn't stable, but they're not in immediate danger." Martha leaned against the wall. "The other woman, who is she?" "We haven't confirmed her identity yet." However, Detective Connor was about to continue when another officer came running from the elevator. "Detective." The officer was out of breath. "The forensics team found something. A message written in blood on the bathroom mirror." The officer's words made one of the policemen turn pale. It was a young officer standing behind Detective Connor. He faltered and leaned against the wall. "What's wrong, Jenkins?" Detective Connor turned around. "Sorry, Detective," Jenkins said with a trembling voice. "This is my first violent crime scene." To Martha, everything felt like a surreal nightmare. Standing in the hallway, she stared at her apartment door. The warning note taped there fluttered slightly in the breeze. "Who left that note?" she murmured. Detective Connor looked at her and said, "That's an important question. Thanks to that note, you and your child avoided danger. We need to investigate who tried to help you." Just then, Martha's phone rang. Looking at the name on the screen, she caught her breath. "Brian." Before answering, Martha suddenly understood. Her ex-husband might have known something and tried to protect her and the baby, but many mysteries remained. What had happened in the apartment? And who was the young woman? She answered the phone. "Brian, what's happening?" His voice on the other end of the line was a mixture of tension and relief. The waiting room at Massachusetts General Hospital had an antiseptic smell and institutional lighting. Martha sat in a hard plastic chair, holding the sleeping Ava and staring into space. Thomas sat next to her, hugging his knees, staring at the floor with a disturbed expression. Having come directly from school to the hospital, he seemed to have difficulty understanding the situation. "It's okay." Martha placed her hand on her son's shoulder. "We're safe. But Nate, Dad is..." Thomas's voice trembled. Martha was at a loss for words. How could she explain to her 12-year-old son that his stepfather and an unknown woman had been found bloodied? Looking up, she saw Brian returning from the hospital cafeteria. He was carrying 2 coffee cups and a hot chocolate for Thomas. "You should drink something," he said quietly. Martha murmured, "Thanks," and took the coffee. Her hands were shaking, but the warm cup provided some comfort. "What happened, Brian?" she finally asked. "Why did you leave that note?" Brian took a deep breath. "Thomas, could you go to the vending machines for a bit?" He handed his son some money. "You can buy whatever you like." Thomas reluctantly stood up and walked toward the end of the hallway. When he was gone, Brian sat next to Martha. "I've been investigating Nathan for a while," he said quietly. "Investigating?" Martha looked up in surprise. What do you mean? Brian chose his words carefully. I want you to be happy. But I felt something was off about Nathan, especially lately. Martha nodded silently. She had felt it too. You know, I got a private investigator's license after leaving the police, he continued. Along with my work at the rehab center, I handle some cases. I used my skills to look into Nathan. What did you find? Martha asked in a trembling voice. He had relationships with multiple women, but particularly a deep relationship with a woman named Jessica, Brian said carefully. She was a young secretary at his real estate company. An icy lump settled in Martha's chest. Is this Jessica, the woman in the apartment today? Brian nodded. Yes, she was pregnant with Nathan's child. Martha gasped. Ava moved slightly, and she unconsciously held the baby tightly to her chest. Nathan was apparently pressuring her to have an abortion, Brian continued. He was probably afraid she would give birth around the same time as Ava. I knew there was trouble between them. So when you were being discharged today, I thought something might happen. So that's why the note, Martha murmured. I spoke with Jessica 2 days ago, Brian said. She told me about her relationship with Nathan. She was desperate. I advised her to go to the police, but... He frowned. Today, I saw Nathan at your house. Shortly after, I saw Jessica going in. I felt something was wrong and went to check, but as I was about to get in the elevator, I heard screaming from inside. And you left the note on the door, Martha continued. Yes. After calling the police, I thought you might be discharged early from the hospital. He paused. I'm so glad you saw the note and called the police. Their conversation was interrupted when a doctor entered the waiting room. Mrs. Johnson? Called a middle-aged woman in a white coat. Martha and Brian stood up. Yes, that's me, Martha said. How is my husband? Nathan Clark has completed surgery and is currently stable, the doctor said quietly. He suffered 2 stab wounds to the abdomen, but damage to vital organs was avoided. There was significant blood loss, but his life is not in danger. Martha sighed with relief. Despite her complicated feelings toward Nathan, she didn't wish for his death. As for the other person, Jessica Rose, the doctor paused momentarily. She is also stable, but her situation is a bit more complex. She has a stab wound to the chest and a head injury, and she was pregnant, about 11 weeks. We're still evaluating the impact on the fetus. Martha collapsed into her chair. In her arms, Ava woke up and began to cry softly. Message from the police. A nurse approached the doctor and whispered something. The doctor nodded and turned back to Martha. The police want to speak with both of you. Apparently, they found some important evidence on Rose's cell phone. Just then, Detective Connor entered the waiting room. His expression was even more serious than before. Mrs. Johnson, there's been a new development, he said carefully. We found recordings of conversations between your husband and Miss Rose on her cell phone. The content is quite serious. Martha, holding the baby close, asked, What do you mean? According to the recordings, Mr. Clark was pressuring Rose to have an abortion and threatening that she would regret it if she refused, the detective explained. There's also evidence that he had been violent toward Rose previously. Martha couldn't believe it. The Nathan she knew, who always seemed gentlemanly and thoughtful, had another face. That's not all, the detective continued. From the scene, it's clear that it was Clark who initially had the knife. Rose's injuries are clearly defensive. It's likely she stabbed him in self-defense. Martha was speechless. Her world was crumbling. The seemingly perfect marriage, the man she believed to be an ideal husband, all of it had been a lie. I want to talk to her, Martha finally spoke. To Jessica, Brian asked in surprise. To Jessica? Martha nodded. She's the one who knows the truth. Autumn in Boston is a season of beautiful foliage. In Martha's backyard, golden maple leaves danced in the wind, and the happy voice of 6-month-old Ava rang out. She lay on a blanket, trying to grasp falling leaves with her tiny hands. Ava, lunch will be ready soon, Martha called from the deck. Beside her, Jessica was chopping vegetables. Her belly was heavily rounded with just a few weeks left until her due date. 6 months since the incident, Nathan had received a 5-year prison sentence for assault and threats. During the trial, it was revealed that his former wife had suffered similar violence. Even in prison, he showed no signs of remorse, instead continuing to claim that he was the victim. Meanwhile, Martha and Jessica had developed an unexpected friendship. Their first meeting at the hospital had been tense, but the two women came to understand each other through their shared pain. Jessica had overcome the initial risk of miscarriage and now proudly carried her growing belly. She lived in Martha's guest house and had become part of the family. "Mom, look what I made." Thomas proudly brought a small wooden baby crib. "Dad taught me how." Martha smiled warmly. "It's wonderful, Thomas. Jessica's baby will love it." Brian came up behind Thomas with woodworking tools. He had rented an apartment near Martha's house and treasured his weekend time with Thomas and Ava. His relationship with Martha had become one based on friendship and respect, and the old wounds were healing. "Pizza's here." Brian's mother, Margaret, came into the backyard carrying large pizza boxes. She often joined family gatherings as the children's honorary grandmother. "The Hawaiian is mine." Elderly Betsy from next door also came up to the deck with a homemade apple pie. Living alone, Betsy had looked after Martha since she first moved in, and was now part of the family. Martha looked around at them all, filled with happiness. This was family, not necessarily connected by blood or marriage vows, but a gathering of people united by caring for and supporting each other. At dusk, everyone gathered around the table, talking animatedly about Thomas's school events, plans for Jessica's baby shower, and Brian's new job. Martha paused for a moment to imprint this warm scene in her heart. "Let's take a family photo," Betsy suggested. Everyone gathered on the deck with Margaret holding a selfie stick in the center. Everyone smile. As the camera shutter clicked, Martha offered a small prayer that this happiness, these true bonds, could be cherished forever. No one noticed, but across the street, a car was parked. Nathan, on weekend release from prison, watched through the window at the lights of Martha's house, and the family filled with smiles. Regret showed on his face, but it was already too late. What he once had but failed to cherish, trust, love, and a true family, Martha had found in a new form. As the night deepened, warm light continued to spill from the windows of Martha's house. That light quietly told the story of a place where wounded hearts could heal and new bonds could form.